plant floor associates who may only interact with the computers a little bit are every bit as important to your overall security posture as a developer that's sitting there writing code.
Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes, an Iron Skills podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with CISOs, security directors and architects, SOC analysts, and other InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to Cybersecurity Heroes. I'm your host for today's episode, Brendan Rodd, Director of Lifecycle Marketing at IronScales, self-learning email security platform. I'm joined today by Tareq Falah, Vice President of Information Technology at Creative Foam Corp. Hey, Tareq, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. I can't wait to share some of your insights with our audience today. But before we dive in, can you please tell our listeners who you are, a little bit about your background and what your team is up to, Creative Foam Corp?
Sure. So I am the Vice President of Information Technology, as you said. Creative Foam is a manufacturing company. We specialize across 3 different divisions: transportation, which includes automotive, as well as healthcare, where we manufacture different kinds of things. We popped up recently in the news last year for manufacturing things like face shields during the pandemic. And then we have another division which is responsible for producing things like the turbines, the blades that go into those wind turbines that you'll see on the road that power the wind energy sector. We are responsible for producing those as well. So that's what we do. And I'm responsible for all of the information technology there, from cybersecurity to ERP and everything in between.
Cool. I was looking at your profile and a few things caught my attention that I wanted to explore with you. It talked about implementing strong information technology and information security systems and infrastructure. Can you give us some examples of your method?
Sure. It really is important to view cybersecurity as kind of a holistic approach. There's sometimes a misconception that the people that can manage the systems or that can push the buttons are the ones that are responsible for cybersecurity. But in reality, everything starts at the top. And so it really means that you have to go in and explain why you're doing something to top level management, and not only explain, but make sure that what you're doing correlates with the strategic goals they have. So, oftentimes in information technology, we may go out, see something new and exciting and want to buy it and feel like it's going to help the business. But if we can't tie it to a specific strategic goal for the business, then it doesn't really help. So it's important to go in, get buy-in from senior management, make sure they understand why we're doing this, why we're investing, why we're making a change, why we're putting together a system, whatever it may be, and get their buy-in so that can flow all the way down to the people that are operating on the shop floor. So no matter what kind of project I've engaged in, I've made sure that we have that kind of buy-in, we have that understanding of what we're doing and why it's beneficial for the whole organization, and not just for a specific technology need that we want.
And you spoke previously about looking to constantly improve systems. You mentioned specifically, don't let your systems stop working. Could you talk a bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, technology in general is changing every single day. Things that we see delivered today have been in production for probably 2 years, especially with things like processors or memory, things like that. So we're always behind. And the same is true for cybersecurity. So as we're, antivirus engines are making updates and we're getting those kinds of security patches, that's already old news. We're trying to play catch up with bad guys. So for us, it's always important that we don't ever stop and say, I think we're good now. We look at what's next. How can we improve? How can we do something a little bit more to make sure that we're going the extra mile, that we're being proactive? Our goal is to always have a proactive cybersecurity posture. We don't want to be waiting to see what's going to happen and be reactive. We want to stay proactive and try to find something before it manifests. So whether it's implementing monitoring, whether it's doing more training to try to alter behaviors of our users, we're always trying to stay a few steps ahead before we fall victim to some kind of an attack.
And do you have a specific, timeline or calendar cycle when you think about those things? How do you get into those conversations or thought patterns?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's easy to get bogged down with the amount of projects that you want to entertain or get involved with. We typically build, and we have built, a 5-year kind of strategic roadmap. So we partner with the business and say, who is Creative Foam in 5 years? What do we look like? Where are we operating? Maybe we've moved out to other countries. Maybe we have different products. Maybe we're bigger. Maybe we're smaller. Who knows? So we try to fit all of that into kind of a map that we can say, okay, well, if these are the goals in 5 years, then let's translate those to IT goals. And so we build a 5-year roadmap that says, at the end of 5 years, this is what we expect to look like. And that means this in terms of technology, whether it means we're going, migrating to the cloud, or, we're implementing multi-factor authentication for every possible system, or whatever it is, encryption in transit and at rest for all systems, internal and external. Those kinds of goals you can articulate very clearly. And then that helps you plan for every single year. So now that I have a 5-year roadmap, I can say, all right, in this calendar year 2021, this is what I have to achieve in order to get to that 5-year long-term goal. So we kind of break it down from the top and get to smaller and smaller actionable goals that we can then execute.
And I've been talking to some of my guests lately on frameworks, and I was curious to get your point of view on frameworks, such as, do you use them? Do they work? How should we use them, and when not to?
Sure. So I would say never use them. Never use a framework if you think that this is just the latest buzzworthy thing to do and you heard somebody talk about it, or you want to be like someone, so we should copy the framework that they're using because that's best practice. Because that's not the goal of a framework. A framework encapsulates things that are accomplishing a specific goal. So you need to first identify, what are your goals that you want to have? Is it satisfying, a customer's obligation? Are you trying to meet certain requirements that they have? Is it legal or regulatory requirements? What are the requirements that you're trying to satisfy? Because there are many frameworks, and you may not just say, well, this particular one works for me. Whether you're looking at ISO or NIST or TSAX or any of the frameworks, if it's enterprise architecture and you're looking at TOGAF or those kinds of frameworks, it may not be a one-size-fits-all kind of a scenario. You may need to pick and pull different things and adapt them to the needs of your business. So I think really it's trying to find out what are your goals, and then developing either one or multiple frameworks that are going to help you accomplish those goals. I do agree in some regard, they may not have caught up as quickly as we would like. When many of these frameworks were first developed, there are tons and tons of sections in those frameworks that were relevant at the time, but things have maybe changed, and some of them have been updated. I think what's important is thinking about the methodologies behind the frameworks. Don't get too caught up with specific protocols or certain implementations of technology, but think about the methodologies of how you do something. For example, how do you do, if you're looking at risk, you're still going to go through the same steps of identifying all of your assets, classifying the assets, going through business impact analysis, those kinds of things that are pretty much generic. Those don't change. Those are static. So looking at kind of the overall general principles that you can pull from the frameworks and maybe adapt them to your needs, or find multiple things that help you out, is probably the best path forward. Unless you're asked by a customer to implement one specific thing, then I think you're open to interpretation, to figuring out what works best for you.
I was reading your profile. You spoke about aligning talents and efforts with organizational objectives. Can you also unpack that a little bit?
Sure. As I mentioned before, as those of us who work in technology, it's always, at least for me, I like to stay on kind of the cutting edge, the leading edge. Some people call it the bleeding edge because it is a little bit painful, but we'll go out there and try to find what's the latest and greatest tools that we can use, or gravitate towards the things that are changing. But it's critical that you don't get that you don't lose sight of the bigger picture here, which is that if you go out and you implement something and you can't quantify how well that improves the organization or how much value that adds, then you have a huge question mark over all of the time, over the capital, over the resources that you expend in implementing that. So it's critical, again, that you go back to senior management, that you say, what are the organizational objectives that we have to accomplish? What are your top 5 strategic goals that you're hoping to work on? And then you take that and translate it to IT goals. And you say, okay, well, that means, we need to go to the cloud, or that means we need to implement some kind of new security measures. Whatever it is, you have to tie that to a business goal, because if you don't, then you're kind of operating on an island of one and watching the rest of the business operate, which is not a good place to be.
Yeah, I really liked what you said on our last call. You said, never let your passion or desire dictate.
Absolutely. Yeah. As much as I may like something, as much as I may personally be invested in it, there are things out there that I support pretty heavily. There are products that I love. There are vendors that I really enjoy, or people or technologies. But if they don't match up with goals that I have personally, or if they don't align with the needs of the business, then I'm not serving anyone's benefit by going out there and implementing that.
I saw a really great definition the other day by Dr. Richard Diston talking about how to measure risk. And he said something along the lines of, we can only begin to understand our appetite for risk when we understand how much money is in the bank, and which equates to risk capacity. I'm curious to hear what your definition of cybersecurity risk is and how you look at it.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to look at it. We kind of look at, I would say capacity is one way to say it. Certainly, how much could you spend if you were to suffer a particular security incident, or if an event manifested. We look at, and from the very beginning, we identify what is our risk appetite. So what are we willing to accept in terms of loss, in terms of downtime? And then not only what are we willing to accept, but what is our customers' capacity for risk? What is their appetite? What can we even, we may be limited in terms of what we can have based on what their requirements are. So I think it's important to look at it. Again, our goal is always to try to manage risk, not necessarily to a level of zero. And I think that's an important thing that people get lost in, is that they think eliminate all risk. But your goal is to manage risk or mitigate risk down to an acceptable level, down to a level that you are comfortable with. It's not to try to get it to zero, because that's not possible. Your goal is to get it down to an acceptable level that fits within your capacity or your appetite. So expect some amount of loss, expect that you're going to get attacked, or you're going to have a breach, or you're going to have a phishing scam manifest, or something like that. And you have to figure out what those things are, those particular threats that could manifest, but you can't manage all of it down to a 0 point. So what is your capacity is really a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know what cybersecurity KPIs your company is looking at regularly.
So we have a pretty good dashboard that we look at daily, which shows us a lot of different things. I think key things that stick out for us are how many security incidents are we looking at a daily basis. So we have a differentiation between a security event, which is simply a blip on the radar. Something doesn't look right, but it hasn't necessarily manifested into an incident where we have a threat and a vulnerability and all these cross sections into risk, and something's manifested and there's a true incident, and whether it's a minor or major. So we look at events, we look at incidents. We have really great users who report to us phishing scams and all kind of malicious emails they may get. So we look at fluctuations there. We look at how well our users perform when we roll out simulations. So if we put out various kinds of phishing scams or robocalling scams, how well do we perform? Because if our users don't perform well, that doesn't mean that we have bad users. That means that our training isn't sufficient. And so we need to do a better job training our users. We look at our SIM, the collection of all our log files throughout the organization, through firewalls and through switches and through applications. We collect all that data and try to find anomalies. We automate that as much as we can using playbooks. And then we still have some manual human intervention to go in and really find out what's going on, what do we need to turn our attention to. And then we look all of that quarterly with our information security committee, the steering committee that we have, and we meet and we're very transparent and upfront about, hey, our goal was to have this level of incidents or to manage risk to this level. How well are we doing that? And we can look at the high level metrics with them and really hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we're doing what we say we're doing.
I know I've had some guests on the show ask, how do you get more budget? Would you say those board meetings can sway budget decisions depending how good or bad you're doing?
Yeah, I certainly, I think if you have a lack of capital or a lack of operating expenses, then your goal really is to explain how adding more will help you. Oftentimes people will look and say, well, I need to add another person because we're too busy, or we have too many risk events and we need to buy this software solution because it says it's going to fix it, or the salesperson said from this vendor that it'll help us. You have to be able to explain in very good detail, not just will it do that, but how well will it do that? When we look at things like problem solving, we always instruct our team members, when you're looking for solving for root causes and things like that, don't just say, oh, I found the root cause and I solved the problem, I'm putting a countermeasure in and that's it. No, the expectation is that you found maybe part of the root cause, or if there are multiple, you found one of them, or even if there is one root cause and you implement a countermeasure, you can't walk away and say, I fixed it. You have to monitor that and say, I fixed it by 70% or 80%. The same is true with this. If I ask the steering committee or the board for capital, I better be able to explain, how is this going to fix the problem that I'm showing you? Is it going to completely remove the need for my team to have another head, or what is it going to do? So it's important that you clearly quantify how. When we go to ask for money, we are very upfront about what we're doing. We go through and articulate the entire project, what the cost is, what the ROI is. All of those kinds of things are huge factors in being able to get that. But you have to be very clear about what your goal is and how well this thing that you're asking for is going to help.
And would you say that buying technology is easier to prove an ROI to board versus having to put together a case on hiring an extra headcount? Obviously, if that technology can save a person's headcount, I'm just curious on how those decisions get made.
Yeah. I would say that in general, hiring a person is probably always harder. I think there's just this stigma that, well, as your team numbers go up, you're getting too big. And how do you know if you're big enough? And that's actually a really hard thing to figure out is, how big is too big and how big is just enough? That's really hard. I think you have to be very diligent about looking at your performance and finding out and saying, yeah, we're not knocking out enough tickets every single day. Our metrics for open tickets is just always dragging. And then make sure that if you say I need a person, that you have a good plan for how that's going to help. And you've also examined every other possible option, because you may have many other ways of solving that. Have you looked at automating your ticket closers? Have you looked at automating some of your risk response? Have you looked at a third party who may be able to take a burden off of an FTE and save you some money? So I think, getting a person is always harder, I would say, in general. It's not that software is easier, partnering up with an MSP is easier, but I think it's easier to explain how that thing is going to help you versus how a person is going to help you, because you just don't know until you get them in. And there's a lot more opportunity to explore with software and automation and, a third party than there is with an employee.
Yeah. And I guess you're also dealing with a human being versus something that's much easier to control in theory, a piece of technology.
Absolutely. If you have a good vendor that you can build a great relationship with, then it's very predictable of what the outcome will be, versus an employee that, not to say you don't need employees, but it's unpredictable. And you have to really be able to say, how are you going to use this person? because there may be many things that the person is going to do, whereas the vendor may have a very specific area that they're going to fill in, a niche that you just have to accept that you're weak at. So there's a lot more favorability, I would say, towards finding a vendor who can fill a specific need for you than a person who may open up a lot more opportunities.
I wanted to ask you about another impressive stat that I saw in your profile. You mentioned sustaining 99% uptime across all servers and network resources through upgrades, enforcement of SLA requirements with vendors, and the use of high availability private cloud platforms. Could you unpack that a little bit for us and our audience on how you achieved that?
Yeah. So it's obviously not an easy task. I mean, there are things in this equation that the most important thing is what are you capable of affecting change on? And then what are the things that are completely out of your control? The things that are outside of your control, if there's truly nothing you can do about it. For example, if you are at a facility that's in a very remote location and the internet speeds are just not what you need, and that's the only carrier there, you're kind of stuck. And there are some things like that where you may get into situations where you simply have no ability to affect change. So you put those on the side and say, we're not touching those. Let's worry about the 80-20. Let's worry about the 80% of things that we can get in and affect. And where do we have bottlenecks? Where are the things that are consuming or taking up bandwidth or causing downtime? Where are those things at? Find all of those things, identify them, and then figure out what it would take to improve and figure out the ROI for each one of those things. Is it beneficial? For example, if I've got a server and I have downtime for that server and it takes me, 2 hours to restore, and that's just simply not acceptable, but I can replace that server, I can go to a virtualized server and I can improve that time, great, I've saved it. But there may be some things in there where you say, yeah, I'm going to shave off, 0.0001 seconds, but it's going to cost me $100,000. Well, cost benefit really isn't there. Find something else. Find those things that are the biggest, chunkiest elements that are causing the biggest bottlenecks in your uptime and attack those first. Get the 80-20 going and then go from there. And it's a continuous improvement cycle. You don't stop. You keep finding areas where you have gaps and you shore them up as you can.
What are you and your team working on right now at Creative Foam Corp?
So the biggest thing we have on our plate right now is we're working on really going through a full risk assessment and preparing ourselves for some of the audits that we have throughout the industry. So we have TSAX, which is a European newer audit requirement that we have, as well as ISO 27001. So both of those are similar. They have their own caveats and differences. So we're really going through and making sure that our information security management system is up to speed. We're reviewing all of our standards, policies, procedures. We're going through and making sure that where we say we have controls in place, they are actually in place and they're performing at the level we expect. We're going through and making sure that physically we are in lock and step, that we have good perimeter security everywhere, that it's been tested, that it's been validated. And most importantly, we're really going through and getting with all of the individuals throughout the company, whether it's somebody that's working on the plant floor or an executive in an office. We're partnering with every single person and making sure that they have the training they need so that if they do experience a security incident or if they happen to find an event, that they know how to contact us and they know how to be aware of what to do, which is really the biggest part of all of that, is making sure you have a very intelligent and not necessarily IQ level, but cybersecurity intelligent user base that can help you out and assist you.
Yeah, the last time we spoke, you gave some great examples of like how you're securing manufacturing associates, who have less of a digital footprint. So I would love for you to share that story with our audience.
Yeah, I think it's really hard in manufacturing. And for those of you, the listeners that haven't worked inside of manufacturing, they'll have to learn about this and understand it. For those of us that are in it, they get it. They know what I'm saying. But, getting into a manufacturing environment is very different than when you're sitting in an office in a building and you're working in sales or something like that, or any other kind of environment that is, more traditional. Manufacturing, it's very focused on the product that you have in front of you, the machinery, and we sometimes lose sight of all the technology stuff that surrounds it that just gets lost in the shuffle. So for example, when I first came to the organization, I decided to do some sort of testing to kind of see where we were in terms of our physical security and our ability to mitigate social engineering and those kinds of basic attacks. So I put on a shirt for the organization that had our logo on it, grabbed a couple of boxes that were empty, and waited until someone who was coming up to the door to enter the facility. So my goal was, I'm trying to piggyback off of that person because we have RFID badge readers that allow you access into the facility. So if you don't have the badge, you can't get in. But if I can piggyback off of someone who's going in and make my way in the facility, then mission accomplished. So as soon as I saw somebody coming up, I grabbed the boxes and kind of had them and acted like I was struggling and I was having a hard time getting up to the building. And I said, hey, I'm just trying to get these in. I have to set them off on the manager's desk. Can you hold the door open for me? Sorry, it's just really heavy. And that person just immediately wanted to help out, which they're a good person. They want to help. I understand. Swiped their badge, held the door open for me, let me in and said, where do you need to go? Can I help you find your way? I mean, they were very nice and offering me anything I needed. And I got right to the manager's office, plugged in a USB drive, tried a few things. I was able to open one filing cabinet. So with that one, very, very basic tactic, I had myself in the building immediately. I had access to everything I needed. I had access to technology as well as physical documentation. So the important takeaway from that was that, these plant floor associates who may only interact with the computers a little bit are every bit as important to your overall security posture as a developer that's sitting there writing code or a network professional that's taking care of your servers. They're just as important, sometimes more so, because that may be your weakest link where you don't spend enough time training and educating.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Places where you least expect have the biggest vulnerability. What are you trying to do to reduce remote work risk?
Yeah, so the biggest thing there is we're looking at a lot of the things that are trending right now. Obviously, because of COVID, a lot of people are working remote. We're on Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever technology companies are using, and there are new things that are happening. We're getting a lot of the calendar invites where somebody's just trying to get a link into your organization, trying to find a way in, or spoofing meetings or doing different kinds of things. And in a rush, in your kind of normal day-to-day mode, you ignore where it's coming from. So we're going through a lot of simulations. We are putting various kinds of simulations of attacks, of phishing scams, of robocalling, of social engineering, all kinds of simulations. And then as we watch those users perform, we follow up with training wherever it's necessary. So if somebody falls flat on their face and they have a breakdown, we make sure not to point a finger and say, you failed, shame on you. We say, shame on us. What did we do wrong? How can we help you solve this? Because you guys are the most important link in this whole chain. So we need to make sure that you are up to speed on everything you need. In addition to that, we're really working hard on kind of creating boundaries for our data. So as people are working remote, people want to work on their iPad, they want to work on our laptop, they want to work on their cell phone, which it makes sense. We want to have a flexible remote workforce that feels comfortable working from home or working from daycare as they pick up their kid, whatever it may be. We need to support that. So we're working hard on worrying less about the physical device and really focusing on using different kinds of vendors to isolate and protect the data by putting in boundaries, looking for access requirements that may not be met, or looking for anomalous activity and stopping that before it manifests into anything else. So we're being diligent about the security while we're still also allowing our employees to be flexible.
And are you seeing any specific trends in the automotive or manufacturing industry?
A lot of it has been, it's nothing new. It's things that have already been out there. So I just talked to a former colleague of mine who is at a different industry, and he's the COO there, and they just got hit with a scam where somebody felt pressured enough to send, I think it was $250,000, because they felt compelled that this is real and I'm under pressure and I have to hurry and do this. And oh no, the manager is out of the office. What do I do? If we don't do this, we're going to shut down a building. And they didn't stop and take the time to figure out, wait, did I ask the right questions? Did I make a phone call? Did I ask somebody else? They got under pressure, which is a common tactic. They felt threatened. They felt nervous, and they tried to do what they thought was right. So I would say it's there are certainly some new things with trying to tap into remote work environments with teams and things like that through calendar invites. There are a lot of malicious websites being set up for companies that are trying to source raw materials. So because of all the shortages, there are all kinds of sites getting spun up to target specific keywords and hoping that you'll click there and say, we have this thing that you guys need desperately in stock, we'll sell it to you. And in a rush, again, you're not pausing to check things out. You're just going through the motions of getting what you need to do your job. So I'd say it's more of the same. They're, maybe masking it to be a little bit different, but it's that same tactic of trying to scare you and trying to bully you into doing something that you shouldn't do.
And would you say that the victims in these cases had a lot of reconnaissance on them?
Yeah, I would say certainly reconnaissance for the larger scams has increased. These attackers know who the CEO is, who the COO is, but they also know, more importantly, the names of people like executive assistants, accounts payable clerks, those kinds of people who, are the ones that are actually doing the heavy lifting. So while it's nice to target a CEO, there's a huge chance that he or she may never read it, or they may scroll past it. They're too busy. They never look at the email. But you find an accounts payable clerk or an executive assistant or a purchasing person who, if you can do it right and do your reconnaissance and find the right names, the right numbers, the names of customers, you can find account codes or anything like that will help you in your effort. Yeah, you're going to be able to sell it a lot harder. So I am seeing more reconnaissance work. I'm seeing people doing more of the finding spoof domains. So they're getting domains with, a strange character instead of an M, they may do two V's or something like that, or a W. Instead of a W, it'll be two V's. So they're looking for that. It's not a lot of effort. You can go to GoDaddy and find a domain for a couple bucks and you're off and running. But the attackers are more motivated to spend a little bit more time because the payoff on some of those is pretty dramatic. $250,000 is a ridiculous amount of money, and even with cybersecurity insurance, that's gonna leave a lasting impression on that company.
Yeah, because it's not that difficult to go to LinkedIn and look at the entire org chart with a free account. You don't even need to have a premium subscription. So social media is definitely playing a role, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword. If you need LinkedIn for your professional day-to-day, what do you do?
Yeah, it's a necessary thing to have in these days. I don't think any company can expect to really operate without LinkedIn, without Facebook, Twitter, those kinds of things, especially for those companies that are really selling directly to consumers. You need to be able to have that kind of contact with your user base. So you got to have it. But what you also have to have is you really got to have the security and awareness training to make sure that your users know what to look out for. And if they ever feel even an ounce of suspicion, then report it, call someone. I always tell, no matter what company I'm working with, it's always been the same message. I would rather you guys submit 1,000 tickets a day of suspicious behavior and be wrong 1,000 times than have that one time where you don't submit it because you're worried that you don't want to bother someone, or it's not a big deal, or they have so much work to do, I don't want to give them one more. No, that's what cybersecurity professionals are there for. They're there to hold your hand and make sure that you're doing the right thing, so you have to use them.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's important to build that into the culture from an early stage, even possibly through onboarding and HR, make sure that message is loud and clear. I wanted to also get your perspective on the cybersecurity skills shortage. Some people say there isn't a shortage, and companies just can't afford to pay or don't want to pay. So I'm curious what you think and what are we doing wrong?
Yeah, I think, there is absolutely a lack of quantities in terms of cybersecurity professionals. If you look, there are more and more jobs advertised every day. And there is a huge need out there. And why is there a need? Well, because everything's changing right now. And it's not just a need for cybersecurity professionals. It's really a need for talented individuals who are great problem solvers. The pandemic has really accelerated the need for companies to, it's one of those buzzwords, but it's true. Digital transformation. And it means different things for different people. If you're a manufacturing company, and you don't have an IoT presence or you're very, very minimal, you're behind. You got to get with it. So as we make those changes, and as we introduce IoT, and as we introduce AI and ML and automation and robotics, it changes the need for the workforce that we have. We need less of what I would term non-value add work. And it's not a knock on anyone that does any kind of job. But it's simply the fact that if you have something that can be automated, so if I can automate invoice entry, so if I no longer have to type an actual invoice, I'm now allowing that person to do something more valuable, such as analyze and look at the data to make sure it's correct, or look for anomalies, or do something else. I don't have to worry about that non-value add activity. So as we focus more and more on value add, there is absolutely a need to have problem solvers, people that know how to solve a problem, to create an algorithm, to work on those kinds of things. That's going to go in line with all of our, the graduates that are coming out of school. Having those strong STEM skills and STEAM, it's critical. Being able to think through something mathematically, even if it's not numbers, but a mathematical algorithm is huge. And it's not just computers, it's not just engineering, it's across the board. That's the direction we're going in, is having people that are problem solvers that can work in these things. So we've got that need to have these individuals. And I think what's important is to identify what you need. You may say, I want a Cisco professional, or I want somebody that knows Palo Alto, or I want whatever it is. Pick your flavor. Well, that's nice. If you're a huge company, I suppose, if you're the top, Forbes top 200, maybe you have that ability to create large teams, 20, 50 people per team within that massive department. Most companies aren't like that. Most companies are going to benefit from skilled IT professionals, cybersecurity professionals who really are smart problem solvers and can adapt to different things. They don't just focus on one thing. I think that's really what we're moving toward, is having those people that can solve problems and can move across your organization rather than being devoted to one thing.
And I haven't asked this question before, but where does creativity play a role, or doesn't it?
I think it definitely does. I think again, you turn away from being non-value add. So as you remove the need to enter data, as you remove the need to kind of follow sequentially, if your job is linear focused, if you're just moving through a sequence of operations, then that's fine. You don't need to really deviate or be creative. But the moment you say, I'm going to automate all the stuff that the humans do, and I'm going to ask you to think and do decision-making, analyze, that's where it takes the ability to be creative and really explore solutions and be able to say, what's the risk versus reward here, and go through those kinds of higher level thinking that is required. So absolutely, creativity is going to play a role in that.
Thanks so much, Tareq. I've enjoyed listening to your insights, and I hope the audience has as well. I want to move into the lighter part of the show. We call it the rapid fire questions. So my first question would be, if you could invite one or two people to our show, who would it be and why?
I think it would be Kevin Mitnick. I love listening to Kevin. I love when people get the opportunity to ask him questions. And most importantly, I really love hearing some of his old stories. When he talks about dumpster diving and late nights doing crazy stuff, I think it's a lot of people look at cybersecurity or they look at hacking and they think, it's that stereotypical picture of the guy in the hoodie sitting at a keyboard. But oftentimes it's not anything close to that. Oftentimes what you do is nothing on the computer. You get so much information different ways through social engineering or whatever it may be. So I think listening to him, it's really awesome to be able to hear his stories about what he had in his previous life.
It sounds like you were inspired by him to do your on-site social engineering exercise.
It definitely was, yeah, absolutely.
So what is your most overrated cybersecurity tactic?
I would say, anybody that buys something expecting to take a risk to zero, or anybody that says, I'm going to implement this thing and it's going to solve this problem, and they just call it a day. I think it's really a big mistake to think that, I don't care what it is. If it's hardware, if it's software, there is no way that you ever manage something down to a zero. You manage it as low as you can, and then you still monitor and observe. So I think that's one tactic, and it's probably less of the professionals doing it and more of the sales and the vendors pushing that we have we've got a solution that can solve everything. It just doesn't exist.
And what would you say is your most underrated cybersecurity tactic?
Underrated to me would be, spending a lot of time on your users. I think oftentimes we forget that there's a lot of value there. We may invest in the firewalls and antivirus and email security and all these things. And that's great. That's wonderful. And it will do a great job. But there's always going to be the potential for a 0-day issue to happen. And you have to rely on your users to say, all right, when this new thing that I'm not aware of manifests and it masquerades itself as something that previously known was fine and it slips underneath the radar, what are you going to do? Because it's a 0-day threat, you don't have the ability to proactively stop it. So your only recourse at that point is to make sure your users can help you out. So I think, training and awareness pays itself out so many times. And it doesn't even involve a lot of time or money. It does so well and it helps so much. So I would say that's the most underrated tactic.
Yeah, we firmly believe humans and machines together are like the best combination in having the strongest protection, creating that continuous feedback loop. Like to your point, when you discover a 0-day, if your employees can spot that, teach the machine in real time quickly, and start building up that defense and offense in real time and keep that feedback loop going, that's the real end goal and ultimate defense.
Sure.
What is your all-time favorite book on cybersecurity?
Well, it's not necessarily just cybersecurity. It has a little bit more to do with technology in general, but it's called In the Beginning Was the Command Line by Neil Stephenson. So he goes into talking about all kinds of things, some of the history of computers, whether it's, the history between Microsoft and Apple, or kind of the tyrannical nature that we view some of these companies of, but where they started from. It's got a really cool way of telling some of the history of these different things and gives a nice perspective. It's one of those reads where you're not trying to take away really too much. It's not about improving your knowledge of something. It's a nice, enjoyable read that I've had over the years. And
who is your cyber influencer?
I'd probably pick from two of them. So Brian Krebs, I think is phenomenal. I read his articles all the time. I think he's always spot on with how he thinks about things. He's very much thinking ahead. He's always looking to what's yet to come. And he's very good about digging into details. So I love to follow him. And then Gene Kim, without Gene Kim, we wouldn't have Tripwire, which is a pretty amazing thing that we have today. So those are probably the two that I follow the most in terms of influencers.
And if you could ask your peers one question, what would it be?
I would probably ask them, what's the biggest mistake that you ever made that you wish you could undo? Because I think as a security professional, I have made a lot of them. And I think it would be interesting knowing, what has somebody else done that they think is their worst thing, that to me it might be something minor or vice versa. So I'd love to hear that.
I like that one. Yeah, maybe we should add that as another rapid fire question. So if you could this is a bonus question. If you could ask our CEO one question, what would it be?
I would ask, where do you believe Iron Scales will sit in 5 years from now, in terms of the industry, and what has changed? Who do you hope to be in 5 years? Is it, a change in what your products are, what your offering is? Are you larger? What is it? Who would we see you as in 5 years? And how have you affected the industry positively? What have you done to really reshape the industry?
Great question. We're going to be doing an AMA once a month. So I'll be getting on here with my CEO and answering all of our guests' questions. So stay tuned for those. Tareq, it's really been great speaking with you. I really enjoyed our conversation today. If any of our guests would like to, keep in touch with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the best way. So I guess it's linkedin.com/n/ and then my first name, Tareq, last name, Falah. That's probably the best way to find me. And you can find everything I do there. We have a podcast as well that we do within our company called Teach Me Tech. So you can find our shows on there that we do and kind of put out for our internal audience mostly. But yeah, that's probably the best way to interact.
Awesome. And we'll keep those in the show notes as well. So thanks for taking the time to join us on Cybersecurity Heroes, and to the rest of you, we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by IronScales, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.